Hello guys, what's up? Are you interested in a free, fan-made Thunder Warriors army list that allows you to reenact battles from the Unification Wars? What if I also told you that there are 3D printed models available for virtually every unit? Whether you're a wargamer or a scale modeler, if you want to learn more about weathering, start now by subscribing and clicking the bell. As those of you who are Race for Terra Discord members will know, a team of 6 guys from our community and yours truly have been working away on this unofficial Age of Darkness expansion since January. Rather than base our work on our own individual ideas or on vague lore videos or wikis, we have adopted Chris Raid's excellent novel, Valdor: Birth of the Imperium, as our main source. We have tried to stay true to the spirit of Thunder Warriors, as described by Raid, or Valdor if you prefer, even when that meant that the rules might not be to everybody's liking. But enough talk. Let's have a look at some quotations from the novel and then explain how we arrived at the rules. One of the first things that we learn in the novel is that the Thunder Warriors, or rather the Cataegis, were creatures of unbridled fury, reminiscent of the World Eaters after the implantation of the Butcher's Nails. In Chapter 5, talking about the Battle of Mol and Sen, in Nordic, Valdor explains, "It might have been wiser to slow the pace of the assault, to limit our eventual casualties, but by then the Cataegis were caught in a cycle of aggression. Death meant nothing to them. For a time it seemed that orders meant nothing to them either. They were elemental in their violence. Let that sink in." He goes on to explain what he considers a fatal flaw. In that, though, the Thunder Warriors demonstrated their greatest weakness. They were like the munitions we used back then, powerful but unstable. Once loosed, they were hard to control. They broke through the inner chambers like a tide, slaughtering all they encountered. Then later in Chapter 8, Valdor addresses the issue of the genetic instability of the Cataegis, which could manifest itself either physically or mentally. They remain unstable. From Primarch to Neophyte, they will break down suddenly, or lose their minds, or simply stop responding to orders. This was not simply a matter of dry practicality for us. It was a foul thing to witness. A warrior's blood might suddenly rebel against the arteries that carried it, or the organs might start to devour themselves, or the muscle might explode with breakneck growth. He also explains that their awareness of this made the Cataegis even more reckless. Be aware also that they were quite conscious of this likely outcome. It did predictable things to their psychology. Knowing that they were limited by time and circumstance, their attitude to risk became even more cavalier. As if all of this wasn't enough, back in Chapter 5, we also discovered that the Cataegis were resistant to psychic powers, and that exposure to what Tim and company at the Eye of Horus podcast call witchy poo only served to fuel their inner rage. In other words, it seemed that they could channel the same environmental witchy poo that made human soldiers go completely mad into ever greater feats of arms. Talking about the priest king of Mol and Sen, Valdor explains, "There was a sickness. We could all taste it. I have encountered similar sensations since, when fighting other enemies of allied origin. But then it was new to me. It generated little but disgust in me and my brothers. For the Thunder Warriors under Ushotan, it seemed to have a different effect. They thrived on it, at least for a time. They had, I surmised, the capacity to magnify whatever foulness they faced. That ferocity was useful, but it had its weaknesses." So let's recap. Essentially, we have a force of mighty, fearless warriors. Sounds pretty good, right? However, they are also reckless, and more importantly, in the heat of battle, they go berserk and ignore orders. Furthermore, they tend to go even more berserk when exposed to psychic powers, and they suffer from fatal mutations which could kill them at any given moment. Let us now take a look at the rules that we have crafted to try and represent all of the above on the tabletop. The first of those traits we have called Elemental Violence. Yes, that's from the very first quote. Elemental Violence, as you can see, is a bit convoluted. Do bear in mind that this is a beta though. This rule, which was inspired by the special Bloodlust rule from Horus Heresy Book 1, means that Thunder Warriors are highly resistant to things like pinning, fear, or telepathy powers, but at the same time it also renders them rather unpredictable on the tabletop. Depending on what the dice have in store for you as a player, it may be that your game plans are completely changed along the way, and that you're faced with several units falling prey to a sort of berserk madness mid-game. Now, we do understand that this random element is not for everyone, but we strongly believe that this will not only be a faithful representation of the description that we have read before, but also a lot of fun on the tabletop. For me, as a World Eaters player, I can definitely tell you that I would also have loved a similar mechanic to represent how World Eaters would eventually fall prey to the nails during the course of the battle, prior to pre-Demon Anger, The second rule, Unstable Genecraft, aims to represent the aforementioned fatal mutations, which meant that over a period of time, Cataegis armies would inevitably suffer losses regardless of any engagements with the enemy. We debated whether to leave this as a narrative thing, for example over the course of a campaign, or to implement it at the scale of an individual 30k game. In the end, we decided for the latter, at least for the time being. Now, I know that potentially losing 1 to 3 models from a third of your Cataegis units may seem very harsh, but I think it's unlikely to lose you a game by itself. The idea behind this rule is to reinforce the sense of unpredictability of the Cataegis on the one hand, but also to instill a sense of urgency in the player on the other. Between elemental violence and unstable genecraft, the longer the battle, the higher the chances that your carefully laid plans will go awry, forcing you to think on your feet and to adapt to a changing situation. So that's all as far as special rules are concerned. Let us now have a look at a Cataegis tactical squad and see what other influences from Valdor, Birth of the Imperium, we can observe. Now, it is widely known that the Cataegis were physically more powerful than Astartes, but few people know that their equipment was rather poor at the start of the Unification Wars. As Valdor explains, some of the weaknesses we displayed in Nordic have now been addressed. All the armor we use now is of ceramic and metallurgical alloys, rather than the steel plate and hardened leather some of us wore back then. Our blades are equipped with energy fields, and the bolt gun has replaced the old carbines and las rifles. At Molansen, in those days, the levels of technology were roughly comparable. This is why, as you can see on our tactical squad entry, the basic equipment for the Cataegis starts with carapace armor and las weapons, as odd as that might seem. You have the option to purchase better equipment, of course, but we wanted to give you the option to recreate battles like Molansen, right at the start of the Unification Wars. Speaking of Molansen, there is one last thing I wanted to mention in terms of quotations, and that's the existence of 20 different legios, which were obviously created with the same archetypes in mind as the later Legiones Astartes. Thus we're told that the 4th Legio had been given the cognomen at the time Iron Lords. They were specialists in siegecraft, through both training and genecraft. Now that sounds oddly familiar, doesn't it? We are also told that their commanders were known as Primarchs, and that the Primarch was equivalent to the Captain General rank in broad terms, responsible for the discipline and conduct of the entire Legio. He was not physically different to any of his troops, but had distinguished himself in combat and leadership, and was appointed directly by the Emperor. The Primarch of the 4th was Ushotan, and he is described by Valdor as a superlative warrior and a fine general. But at the same time, Valdor also confesses that Ushotan was someone who looked like the ghost of all murders. Be that as it may, we have paid homage to Ushotan with a separate entry, given the role that he plays in the novel. If you've read it, I'm sure you can understand why. Well, this concludes what I call our process journal for the rules. Let's now have a look at some models, shall we? Over coming weeks and months, you will see both myself and other Race for Terra community members put out examples of painted Cataegis units, but for now, here are some that I have printed, built, and primed myself. All the models here are from the Tempest Lords range from the Maker's Cult. They're fantastic models, and I highly recommend them, but let me clarify that this is not a paid promotion and I'm not getting any kind of commission. Here you can see a squad of 8 Cataegis, which are going to belong to the 12th Legion, or as I prefer to call them, Legio Duodecima. Yes, I am a pedant. As you can see, there is a variety of poses and weapons options on display. Over here we have 3 awesome Cataegis jet bikes. Check out that power lance. But you know I'm all about the tanks myself, so here's a nice collection of treaded vehicles. The first one is obviously a Medusa, also known as a Legio artillery tank. This is an older design by the maker's cult, and in terms of fitment, I will admit that there are some issues, as the hull is split into parts in order to facilitate printing on smaller machines. However, at $8 this STL is a great value, and if you're good at gap filling, you shouldn't be too concerned. Next we have the vehicles that we have designated as the 2 Cataegis dedicated transports. First we have this tank, which we have called the Interwebs, with a transport capacity of 10 models, being roughly equivalent in size to a Land Raider. Now I'm only showing you here a couple of different weapons, but there is a lot of options for the turret, the sponsons, and the hull-mounted weapons. And next we have this beast. We've called it the Presidium, and given it a transport capacity of 25 models. This way you can fit a squad of 24 Cataegis and a character inside. It's a brand new design, and you can see that the level of detail that the sculpt has is pretty incredible. I have saved my personal favorite for last, however. This is the tank we have called the Pilum, of which 4 variants exist. This is the one with the Pluvia missile system. This is also one of the latest designs by the maker's cult, and it's a true pleasure to put together, as you can see. This is a file which I purchased myself on CG Trader for $9. It was on sale, it's 11 now. The SEL files that it consists of are perfect for a noob like me. They come pre-supported and pre-hollowed, and I was able to print every component without any fails or issues whatsoever. And that was without really having a clue what I was doing. The design aesthetic puts you in mind of existing Horus Heresy tanks without being too derivative. But let's have a look at the fitment and the design of the individual components. This is the main hull, which took me about 10 hours to print on a Mars 2 Pro. As you can see, it has huge pegs and some pre-made drain holes, since the whole thing is hollow, resulting in massive savings in resin. Each of the sides of the hull required one print of around 9 hours. The beautiful missile rack I did together with some infantry, and that took me only around 4. All in all, the resin costs were of around 15 euros. Now I'm told that by using my own supports, I could have cut the number of prints in half. But you know me, I like to hedge my bets. Quoting a certain film, would you like to know more? If that's the case, check out our blog and you'll see. So, what are the next steps in this project? Well, first of all, this is an open beta, and consider this video our call to arms. If you like the rules, we would like you to give them a try, on the tabletop that is, and give us some feedback. If you like the maker's cult models, pick some up, paint them up, and show us your work. But if you prefer to create or kit bash your own models, or use something different, by all means. And do show us as well. What else are we going to do? Well, our little team of developers is working hard to create a working battle-scribed Cataegis list. At the same time, we're also developing a Terran Warlords list covering the highly idiosyncratic forces of the different techno-barbarian states. At some point in the next few months, we hope that both lists should be available as PDFs and as battle-scribed files. However, the idea is for these to undergo continuous development as more of us, and hopefully more of you, are able to participate in playtesting. If Nurgle allows, we will also be publishing a Unification Wars battle report video on the Race for Terra, which I'm personally very excited about. I'm coming for you, Mycroft! And lastly, and again if the Lord of Decay permits, we would like to organize a Unification Wars narrative event in Germany. Before we conclude, it would be remiss of me not to thank Andrew at the Australis Ultima 30K group, or Aus 30K for short. A few weeks back, I asked him for advice on how to publish this mad project of ours, since I'm a huge fan of his work for the 30K community. His insights were invaluable, but he also mentioned that he'd had a Unification Wars expansion in the back burner for a couple of years. Andrew even offered that we join forces, but as flattered as I was by his invitation, in the end we prefer to go our separate ways. I believe that Aus 30K will soon be publishing their own Unification Wars supplement, which I'm sure will be great, but I just wanted to make it clear that the development of both projects has been completely separate. To my mind, having variety can only be beneficial for the community in the end. Now, while our humble efforts don't look very professional for now, we are really proud of these rules that we have presented to you today, and we can't wait for the next steps. For Unity! So guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I would like to thank all my Patreon supporters again, who are not only helping me buy supplies and keep the lights on, but also contributing to community projects like this and making the Race for Terra Discord community a great place where all of us, myself included, can grow as hobbyists. Thank you everyone, and remember, keep it up and weather it out.